I'm Natalie Thompson, 32, and I've spent 15 years believing my sister Hannah was simply my parents' favorite. That Christmas morning when I was 17 changed everything. While I unwrapped a sweater, Hannah received a house key with a red bow. "It's for the lake house," Mom explained, avoiding my eyes. Dad added cryptically, "You'll understand someday, Natalie." I didn't. Not until last month, when I discovered the truth buried in old property papers. I wasn't a Thompson by blood. My entire life was built on secrets. If you're watching this and feeling that knot in your stomach like I did that Christmas morning, I understand. Family secrets have a way of slowly poisoning relationships until the truth finally erupts. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and if this resonates with you so far, please hit that like button. Family drama like mine often stays hidden in the shadows, but by sharing our stories, we create connections that help us heal. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, long before that fateful Christmas morning. Growing up in suburban Michigan with my sister Hannah was like living in two different families within the same house. Hannah was 3 years older, and from my earliest memories, there was always something different about how our parents, Eleanor and James Thompson, treated us. The signs were subtle at first, easy to dismiss, but they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore as I grew older. When we moved into our two-story colonial home on Maple Street, Hannah automatically got the bigger bedroom with a window seat overlooking the backyard. "Hannah needs more space for her things," Mom explained, though Hannah kept her room in perpetual chaos while I meticulously organized my smaller space. At the time, I accepted this logic without question. Birthday celebrations told the same story. Hannah's parties were elaborate affairs with hired entertainers and custom cakes. For my 10th birthday, I invited 5 friends for a sleepover, only to have Mom suggest we keep it simple, with pizza and a movie. Dad nodded along, adding, "Hannah's just more social, princess. You prefer quiet anyway, right?" I agreed because I wanted to be the easy child, the one who didn't make waves. The disparity extended beyond material things. When Hannah caught the flu in 4th grade, Mom took 3 days off work to tend to her. When I had the same flu the following week, Mom left soup in the refrigerator with instructions to heat it myself after school. "You're more independent," she said, as if this were a compliment rather than an excuse for neglect. Throughout elementary and middle school, I threw myself into academics and swimming, bringing home certificates of achievement and medals from competitions. My report cards featured straight A's, while Hannah scraped by with CS and occasional DS. Yet at dinner, Dad would ruffle Hannah's hair saying, "Grades aren't everything. Hannah has street smarts," while my academic accomplishments received cursory acknowledgement. Hannah had a rebellious streak that mystified me because our parents seemed to find it endearing rather than problematic. When she was caught shoplifting lip gloss at 14, Mom laughed it off as teenage experimentation. When I accidentally broke a plate while doing dishes, I was lectured about responsibility for 30 minutes. Family vacations became exercises in patience. We always went where Hannah wanted. The amusement park instead of the science museum, the beach instead of the mountains. My preferences were treated as afterthoughts, if considered at all. "Hannah gets carsick on mountain roads," Mom would say, though I'd never actually seen evidence of this mysterious ailment. I spent years convincing myself I was being petty or overly sensitive. "Maybe I'm just harder to love," I whispered to myself at night, trying to identify what fundamental flaw made me less worthy of my parents' affection. I developed a persona that required minimal attention, self-sufficient, uncomplaining, achievement-oriented, but modest about it. There was one incident when I was 11 that crystallized the inequality. Our grandmother had given each of us a porcelain figurine that had belonged to her mother. Mine was a ballerina, Hannah's a carousel horse. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find Hannah standing over the shattered remains of my ballerina. When Mom rushed in, Hannah immediately said, "Natalie knocked it over while running in the house." Despite my protests, Mom believed Hannah without question. I was grounded for a week and lectured about respecting family heirlooms. Later, I overheard Hannah bragging to her friend on the phone about getting away with breaking the stupid ballerina. There were other peculiarities that didn't make sense until years later. Mom occasionally made odd comments like, "Hannah really takes after her father," while looking at Hannah's profile. Dad maintained an emotional distance from me despite my attempts to connect through shared activities. I'd suggest fishing trips or asking for help with school projects, but he'd inevitably find reasons to include Hannah or be too busy altogether. Our neighbors and teachers noticed the differential treatment. Mrs. Peterson, my third-grade teacher, once asked during a parent-teacher conference if everything was okay at home, noting I seemed to be trying too hard to please. Mom bristled at the suggestion and switched me to a different class. My friend Lily's mother often invited me for additional sleepovers and sent me home with extra cookies, a kindness I now recognize as adult concern for a child they perceived as emotionally neglected. Christmas was always the most difficult time. The Thompson family had elaborate holiday traditions, matching pajamas for Christmas Eve, special ornaments added to the tree each year, and a careful ritual of opening presents youngest to oldest on Christmas morning. Each year, I'd watch Hannah unwrap thoughtful gifts that aligned with her interests and hobbies, while I received practical items with little personal significance. Still, I'd smile and express gratitude, hoping that my performance of the perfect, appreciative daughter would eventually earn me the same consideration. "Maybe next year will be different," became my silent mantra each December 26th. Maybe next year they'll see me too. Looking back at those formative years, I can see how I internalized the message that I was somehow less deserving of love and attention. I developed coping mechanisms that would follow me into adulthood: overachievement, people-pleasing, and a deep-seated fear of rejection. But nothing prepared me for that Christmas, when I was 17, the day the subtle favoritism became impossible to ignore or rationalize away. The Christmas morning that changed everything started like any other in the Thompson household. I woke to the smell of Mom's cinnamon rolls baking and the sound of Bing Crosby crooning from the living room speakers. Outside, a fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, creating that quintessential Michigan white Christmas scene that looked like something from a Hallmark movie. I remember thinking it felt almost artificially perfect, like a stage set for what was about to unfold. I was 17 that year, Hannah 20. She was home from her first semester at Michigan State, where she was on academic probation but had somehow convinced our parents this was due to adjusting to college life, rather than her preference for parties over classes. I was a high school senior with early acceptance letters from several universities, including my dream school, UC Berkeley, though my parents had expressed concern about me moving so far away from family. That morning, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe my early college acceptances would finally earn me the recognition I'd been seeking. I'd even dropped hints about a laptop for school, something practical, but also meaningful for my future studies. Hannah had been talking about a new phone, though she'd already broken two that year. We gathered in the living room, me in the faded blue pajamas from the previous year while Hannah and my parents wore the new matching sets that had been opened on Christmas Eve. The gift opening ritual began, and I watched as Dad handed out the first round of presents. Hannah received an expensive leather jacket she'd been eyeing. I unwrapped a practical sweater in a color I never wore. "It'll look professional for college interviews," Mom explained, though all my interviews were already completed. Next came Hannah's new phone, with Dad proudly pointing out all the premium features. For me, there was a set of SAT prep books, despite having already taken the test twice with scores high enough for my acceptances. Then came the moment. Dad handed Hannah a small box with a red velvet bow, his expression unusually solemn. The room seemed to still as she unwrapped it, revealing a silver key attached to a floating keychain shaped like a lake. "It's for the lake house," Mom explained, her eyes fixed on Hannah's reaction rather than meeting mine. "We've put it in your name." The lake house was our family vacation property on Lake Michigan, a beautiful 3-bedroom cottage with private beach access that had been in Dad's family for generations. We spent every summer there, and it held some of my few positive family memories. I waited for further explanation, for a similar box to be handed to me, but instead, Dad turned to me with an expression that mixed pity with something like guilt. "You'll understand someday, Natalie," he said cryptically, patting my knee before quickly moving on to distribute gifts to Mom. Hannah caught my eye across the room, a brief flash of smugness crossing her features before she composed herself. "This is so amazing," she gushed, hugging both parents while I sat frozen, clutching my practical sweater and test prep books. I spent the rest of the morning going through the motions, smiling when appropriate, and thanking my parents for each sensible, forgettable gift. Inside, I was shattered. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was explicit exclusion from my family legacy. The Christmas dinner that followed was excruciating. Extended family arrived. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert, cousins Melissa and Troy, and my grandmother Evelyn. As we sat around the dining table, I noticed the sidelong glances, the way conversation awkwardly shifted when I entered rooms. During dessert, I overheard Aunt Patricia whispering to Mom in the kitchen, "Eleanor, when are you going to tell her the truth? She's almost an adult. She deserves to know." Mom's response was terse. "Not now, Patricia. It's Christmas, for God's sake." When they noticed me standing in the doorway, they separated quickly, Mom busying herself with the coffee service while Aunt Patricia gave me a smile that dripped with pity. That night, after everyone had gone and Hannah had left to meet friends, I confronted my parents in the living room. The Christmas tree lights cast shifting shadows across their faces as I asked directly why Hannah had been given the lake house. "It's complicated, Natalie," Mom said, exchanging a look with Dad that I couldn't interpret. "There are legal reasons. Family reasons." What family reasons could possibly justify giving Hannah the lake house and nothing to me? My voice cracked despite my efforts to remain composed. Dad sighed heavily. "You're being dramatic. You got plenty of nice gifts." "This isn't about the gifts. This is about why you always favor Hannah. Why nothing I do is ever enough." Mom's face hardened. "That's enough, Natalie. You're being ungrateful and selfish. Hannah has certain entitlements that you need to accept." Entitlements? What does that even mean? But they shut down the conversation, Dad retreating to his study while Mom began aggressively cleaning up wrapping paper, muttering about teenage theatrics. I fled to my bedroom and finally allowed the tears to come. Years of feeling less than crashed over me in waves. I muffled my sobs with a pillow, not wanting to give them the satisfaction of hearing how deeply they'd hurt me. A soft knock interrupted my breakdown. Hannah entered without waiting for a response, sitting awkwardly at the edge of my bed. "Look, I don't know why they put the lake house in my name," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "It's weird, I agree." I looked up at her through swollen eyes. "Do you know what Dad meant? About me understanding someday?" Hannah shrugged, picking at a loose thread on my comforter.
"Honestly, no.
"But there's always been something off about how they treat you. Even I've noticed." "Then why have you never said anything?" I demanded. She had the decency to look ashamed. "Because it benefited me? I don't know, Nat. We're not close. We never have been." That brief moment of honesty was the most genuine interaction we'd had in years. Hannah left shortly after, and I lay awake until dawn, making a decision that would alter the course of my life. I would get as far away from the Thompson family as possible the moment I graduated. If I wasn't truly part of this family in their eyes, I would stop trying to earn a place that would never be given. That Christmas marked the end of my desperate attempts to be the daughter they wanted. I accepted Berkeley's offer the next day, my decision driven less by academic opportunities and more by the 3,000 miles it would put between me and the family that had made me feel like an outsider for as long as I could remember. What I didn't know then was that distance wouldn't be enough to escape the truth. Some secrets follow you, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves and reshape everything you thought you knew about yourself and those you called family. Berkeley was like stepping into a parallel universe where I could finally breathe. The campus sprawled alongside the bay, so different from the neat suburban grid of my Michigan hometown that it felt like I'd traveled to another country rather than just across states. I moved into my dormitory with 2 suitcases and a desperate desire to reinvent myself. My roommate Abigail Martinez was everything I needed at that moment. Warm, inclusive, and completely uninterested in prying into my family background. She was studying psychology and had an intuitive understanding of personal boundaries that made sharing our small space comfortable from day one. Family is complicated, she said simply when I deflected questions about why my parents hadn't helped me move in like the other freshmen. You're making a new life here. That's what matters. And I was. For the first time, I was Natalie without the shadow of Hannah looming over me. My professors recognized my work ethic and analytical thinking. My swimming improved without the weight of trying to earn parental approval with each medal. I made friends who valued me for qualities I hadn't even recognized in myself. My dry humor, my loyalty, my ability to see architectural solutions where others saw only problems. I chose architecture as my major, drawn to the idea of creating spaces that made people feel welcomed and valued, perhaps compensating for what I'd lacked growing up. The long hours in the studio were a blessing, giving me legitimate reasons to miss family holidays and events. I called home monthly out of obligation. These conversations followed a predictable pattern. Brief inquiries about my studies, updates about Hannah's life that I hadn't asked for, and thinly veiled suggestions that I was missing out by being so far away. What they never mentioned during these calls was that they visited Hannah at Michigan State regularly, attending her sorority events and taking her to dinner, while not once making the trip to California to see me. During my sophomore year, I learned from a casual comment by Mom that Hannah had moved into the lake house permanently. She's fixed it up so nicely, Mom gushed. Added a deck and painted the kitchen that lovely sage green. I pictured the cottage where I'd spent childhood summers, now transformed without my input or presence. Another piece of my history, rewritten without me. I met Marcus Chen during my junior year in an urban planning seminar. He was brilliant, kind, and possessed a quiet confidence I found magnetic. Our first date lasted 6 hours as we walked the Berkeley campus, discussing everything from sustainable city design to our favorite sci-fi novels. By our third date, I knew this was different from any relationship I'd had before. What struck me most about Marcus was his family. The first time he took me home for dinner, I was overwhelmed by the Chong family's easy affection and genuine interest in each other's lives. His parents asked thoughtful questions about my studies and aspirations. His sister teased him, but in a way that radiated love rather than competition. The contrast to my own family dynamic was stark and painful. Your family is beautiful, I told Marcus as we drove back to campus that night. They're a bit much sometimes, he laughed. But yeah, they're pretty great. No, I mean it. The way you all actually listen to each other. The way your mom remembers what courses you're taking. The way your dad asked about your sister's art show even though he doesn't understand abstract expressionism. Marcus glanced at me, his expression softening. Nat, is everything okay with your family? That night, I told him everything. The years of feeling secondary, the Christmas with the lake house key, the growing distance. He listened without judgment, holding my hand across the center console. Family shouldn't make you feel like you're not enough, he said simply. And for what it's worth, I think you're extraordinary. In my senior year, Hannah got engaged to her college boyfriend Tyler, a business major from a wealthy Chicago family. The engagement party was held at the lake house, and I flew back for the weekend out of a sense of obligation that I still couldn't shake. The cottage had indeed been transformed. Hannah had replaced the comfortable, slightly shabby furniture with modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a design magazine rather than a beach house. Family photos adorned the walls, but I noticed with a pang that in many of them, I had been cropped out or was absent altogether. During the party, Mom pulled me aside on the new deck overlooking the water. Isn't this wonderful? Hannah has really made this place special. It's very stylish, I managed, swallowing the lump in my throat as I remembered the rainy afternoons spent playing board games in the now-gone window seat, the fishing trips off the dock that had been replaced with a sleek boating platform. Your sister has really found her place, Mom continued, oblivious to my discomfort. Tyler's family has connections in real estate. They're talking about building a proper house here eventually, something more substantial than this cottage. I nodded, unable to speak. The idea of the modest family cottage being demolished for some McMansion felt like the final erasure of my childhood memories. Later that evening, I overheard Dad and Tyler discussing wedding costs. "We've set aside $50,000 for the wedding," Dad was saying. "Eleanor and I want Hannah's day to be perfect." The figure stunned me. When Marcus and I had gotten engaged the previous month, news I hadn't yet shared with my family. We had been calculating how to manage a simple ceremony on our graduate student budgets. I left the party early, citing an early flight the next morning. Hannah barely noticed my departure, wrapped up in her celebration. Mom gave me a distracted hug, and Dad nodded from across the room. I took a taxi back to my hotel and called Marcus, tears streaming down my face. "I can't do this anymore," I told him. "I can't keep pretending we're a normal family with normal differences. Something is fundamentally wrong, and I don't think I want to know what it is." Marcus's voice was a lifeline across the miles. "Then we build our own family, Nat. One that sees you and values you exactly as you are." And that's what we did. After graduation, we moved to San Francisco, where we both found positions at respected architectural firms. We married in a small ceremony in a redwood grove with Abigail as my maid of honor and Marcus's family embracing me as their own. My parents sent a check and their regrets about being unable to attend due to Hannah's baby shower falling the same weekend. Hannah sent a blender from our registry with a pre-printed card. I limited contact to major holidays and brief phone calls, protecting myself from the hurt that seemed inevitable with each interaction. I built a chosen family of friends and in-laws who showed me what genuine love and support felt like. Marcus's mother called weekly just to check in. His father sent articles about architecture he thought might interest me. His sister Victoria invited us for spontaneous dinners and game nights. Through it all, there remained an aching question at the core of my being. Why? What had I done, or what was inherently wrong with me, that made my own parents unable to love me the way they loved Hannah? What was the mysterious someday when I would understand? My therapist, Dr. Winters, suggested there might be a deeper family secret. The level of differential treatment you describe, combined with their cryptic comments, suggests there's something they're not telling you, she said during one session. Have you ever considered there might be information about your birth or early childhood that they've withheld? I dismissed the idea initially. Surely I would know if I were adopted, or if there were some other significant secret, wouldn't I? But the suggestion planted a seed that would eventually grow into a search for the truth, a truth that would shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew about myself and the Thompson family. San Francisco embraced Marcus and me like Michigan never had. We found an apartment in the Mission District, a vibrant neighborhood with colorful murals and the best to carry us in the city. Both of us thrived professionally, moving up quickly at our respective firms. After 3 years, we pooled our savings for a down payment on a modest Victorian in Bernal Heights. Nothing fancy, but with good bones and a view of the city from our tiny backyard. I threw myself into renovating our home, channeling my architectural knowledge into creating spaces that felt warm and welcoming. Each room I designed was a deliberate counterpoint to the emotional coldness of my childhood home. Our door was always open to friends, and Friday night dinners became a tradition among our social circle. "Your home feels like a hug," Abigail said during one of her visits from Los Angeles, where she'd moved for her psychology practice. "You've created what you needed all along." Meanwhile, through occasional updates from Mom, I learned that Hannah and Tyler had built that substantial house on the lake property, tearing down the cottage that had stood for generations. They had 2 children in quick succession, Emma and Jacob, and Hannah had settled into life as a well-connected stay-at-home mother. My parents visited them monthly, proudly sharing photos of their grandchildren on social media with captions like, "Nothing better than family time at the lake." The contrast between our lives was stark. While Hannah received everything without effort, Marcus and I worked hard for our modest achievements. The inequality still stung, but I'd built a buffer of distance and new relationships that helped dilute the pain. The most difficult challenge came when Marcus and I decided to start a family. Month after month of disappointment led to fertility specialists who diagnosed unexplained infertility. Each negative test was a fresh wound, made worse by Mom's casual mentions of how Hannah just looks at Tyler and gets pregnant, and suggestions that perhaps I'd waited too long by focusing on my career. We were in the middle of our second IVF cycle when the call came. Dad had suffered a major heart attack. He was stable but had undergone emergency bypass surgery. Mom's voice trembled as she asked if I would come home. 5 years had passed since I'd set foot in Michigan. 5 years of building a life that didn't revolve around seeking approval that would never come. But some obligations transcend even the deepest hurts. I'll be on the next flight, I told her, already mentally calculating what projects would need to be rescheduled. Marcus insisted on coming with me. You shouldn't face this alone, he said as we packed our bags. Besides, it's time I met your family properly. The hospital reunion was awkward and charged with unspoken tensions. Hannah arrived just after us, her perfect children in tow, Tyler parking their luxury SUV in the doctor's reserved space. Mom embraced Hannah tearfully before giving me a brief, distracted hug. She barely acknowledged Marcus beyond a cursory introduction. Dad looked small in the hospital bed, his usually commanding presence diminished by tubes and monitors. When he saw me, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or recognition of the years wasted. Natalie, he said, his voice raspy from the intubation tube that had been removed that morning. You came. Of course I came, I replied, surprised by the emotion that welled up. Despite everything, he was still my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had built me a treehouse when I was 8, before the distance between us had grown insurmountable. We need to talk, he said, glancing meaningfully at Hannah and Mom. There are things you should know. Before he could continue, Mom intervened, fussing with his pillows and changing the subject. Let's not tire your father with heavy conversations. He needs rest. The next few days fell into a pattern. I'd arrive at the hospital early, hoping for private time with Dad, only to find Mom already there, running interference. Hannah would appear mid-morning with her children, who would immediately command everyone's attention. Emma and Jacob were cute kids, but watching Mom and Dad lavish them with the affection and attention I'd craved growing up reopened old wounds. On the third day, Dad was moved from ICU to a regular room, and discussions began about his aftercare. Mom seemed strangely protective of the family filing cabinet, insisting she alone would handle insurance paperwork and medical documents. I can help, I offered. I deal with complex paperwork all the time in my work. No need, Mom said quickly. I know where everything is. But that evening, when Mom left to take Hannah and the children home for dinner, Dad asked me to retrieve a specific folder from his home office. Blue folder, bottom right drawer of the filing cabinet. Bring it tomorrow. Don't tell your mother. The conspiratorial tone unsettled me, but I agreed. Marcus and I drove to my childhood home, using the spare key that still hung in the garage. The house was exactly as I remembered, yet felt like a museum of someone else's life. Family photos lined the hallway, the most prominent being Hannah's wedding portrait and pictures of her children. In Dad's office, I quickly located the blue folder. As I pulled it out, several other documents spilled onto the floor. As I gathered them, a phrase caught my eye: trust for biological Thompson descendants. I shouldn't have read further, but something compelled me to scan the document. It detailed a family trust established when I was born, specifically stating that assets would pass to biological descendants of James Thompson. The lake house was explicitly mentioned as being held in trust for Hannah. My hands trembled as I replaced the other documents. I took only the blue folder Dad had requested, but my mind was racing. Biological descendants. The phrase echoed in my head all night. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital determined to get answers. Instead, I found Dad sleeping and Mom standing guard. When I tried to give Dad the folder later, Mom intercepted it. "What's this?" she demanded, opening it. Her face paled as she saw the contents, property records for the lake house dating back 32 years. "Dad asked me to bring it," I said, watching her reaction carefully. Your father is confused from the medication, she snapped, closing the folder. This isn't relevant to his recovery. But I had seen enough. The lake house had been purchased the same year I was born, not inherited through generations as I'd always been told. Something wasn't adding up. That night in our hotel room, I shared my suspicions with Marcus. I think there's something about my birth they've never told me. The trust documents, the lake house purchase date, Dad's cryptic comments, it all points to some secret they've kept my entire life. Marcus took my hands in his. What do you want to do? I thought about Dr. Winter's suggestion years earlier about family secrets. I want the truth. I've lived with questions long enough. The next day, I pretended to hug Mom goodbye and secretly plucked a few strands of her hair. I already had my own, and when Hannah left her coffee cup unattended, I secured it in a plastic bag. I wasn't proud of these actions, but I needed certainty. Back in San Francisco, I sent the samples to a DNA testing service that compared familial relationships. Then I waited, the weight of suspicion growing heavier with each passing day. The DNA results arrived on a foggy San Francisco morning 3 weeks later. I sat at our kitchen table, Marcus beside me, staring at the email notification on my phone. With trembling fingers, I opened the report and began to read. The clinical language couldn't soften the blow. The alleged parent-child relationship between Sample B, Eleanor Thompson, and Sample A, Natalie Thompson, is confirmed with 99.9% probability. The alleged sibling relationship between Sample C, Hannah Thompson, and Sample A, Natalie Thompson, indicates a half-sibling match, sharing approximately 25% genetic material consistent with having one biological parent in common. Half-sibling. One biological parent in common. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I'm not Dad's biological daughter, I whispered, the truth finally taking shape after years of hints and inexplicable treatment. That's why they gave Hannah the lake house. That's why nothing I did was ever good enough. Marcus wrapped his arms around me as sobs racked my body. This doesn't change who you are, Nat. It doesn't justify how they treated you. But it changed everything about how I understood my life. The favoritism wasn't just unfair parenting. It was the manifestation of James Thompson's inability to fully embrace a child who wasn't biologically his. The cryptic "you'll understand someday" had been about inheritance restrictions that excluded me because I wasn't a biological Thompson descendant. After the initial shock subsided, anger took its place. They had let me grow up feeling unwanted and less than rather than telling me the truth. They had punished me for a circumstance entirely beyond my control. I took a week off work, oscillating between rage and grief. Marcus gave me space when I needed it and held me when the pain became too much to bear alone. Whatever you decide to do next, I'm with you, he promised. The decision came one sleepless night. I needed the full truth, not just the DNA confirmation. I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I called Hannah directly. The surprise in her voice was evident. Natalie? Is everything okay? Is it Dad? Dad's fine, as far as I know, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. But I need to talk to you about something important. Something about our family. Okay. She sounded wary. Hannah, I did a DNA test. It shows we're half-siblings. I'm not Dad's biological daughter. The silence that followed confirmed she hadn't known. Her shocked gasp was genuine. That's not possible. Mom and Dad would have said something. Would they? They've been treating me differently my entire life. The lake house, the trust for biological Thompson descendants. It all makes sense now. Another long pause. The lake house. Oh my God, Natalie. I had no idea. For the first time in our adult lives, Hannah and I had a real conversation. She was genuinely horrified by the revelation and what it meant about our childhood. I always knew they favored me, but I thought it was just, I don't know, personality differences or something. Not this. I need to know everything, I told her. Will you help me? To my surprise, she agreed immediately. Yes. This isn't right. What they did to you, to us both by lying, isn't right. 2 weeks later, Hannah flew to San Francisco. The sister who stepped off the plane looked different from the smug, entitled woman I remembered. She seemed smaller somehow, uncertain. We greeted each other awkwardly in the arrivals area, decades of complicated feelings hanging between us. Over dinner at our home that night, we formulated a plan. Hannah revealed that our parents still kept family records in the attic of their house, including old correspondence and legal documents. She had a key and knew they would be visiting Emma at a weekend gymnastics competition in Chicago. "We can search without interruption," she explained. "I want answers too, Natalie. I've been complicit in this without even knowing." The following weekend, Hannah and I met in Michigan. Standing on the porch of our childhood home felt surreal, like stepping back in time. Hannah unlocked the door, and we headed straight for the attic access in the hallway ceiling. The space was dusty and cramped, filled with labeled boxes of holiday decorations and outgrown children's clothes. In the far corner stood a locked filing cabinet. Hannah produced a key from her purse. "Dad gave me this years ago for the family papers. I never had reason to use it." Inside, we found folders meticulously organized by year. We started with the one labeled with my birth year. Among Medicare statements and tax returns were a series of letters between our parents, their formality, suggesting they'd anticipated the correspondence might be read by others someday. "I understand the arrangement and accept your terms," read one from Dad to Mom. "The child will have my name and all the privileges thereof, but the trust will remain as discussed." Another folder contained photographs I'd never seen, Mom with a tall, dark-haired man at what appeared to be a research conference. They stood too close for colleagues, her expression animated in a way I rarely saw with Dad. "Richard Clark," Hannah read from the back of one photo. "Stanford University, 1991. The pieces were falling into place. Mom had been a research assistant at Stanford the year before I was born. She'd met my biological father there, had an affair, gotten pregnant." In a folder labeled Properties, we found the smoking gun. Transfer documents for the lake house, signed by Richard Clark with a note attached. "As agreed, for Hannah only. Natalie will have separate provisions when appropriate." My biological father had purchased the lake house as part of some arrangement with my parents. He hadn't wanted involvement in my life, but had provided financial compensation, with the explicit condition that it would benefit only Hannah, not me. "This is so fucked up," Hannah whispered, shuffling through more documents. "They've been lying to both of us our entire lives." We spent hours piecing together the story through legal documents, letters, and photos. Richard Clark was a wealthy genetics researcher who had been married with children when he had the affair with Mom. He had wanted no public connection to me but had financially provided for my upbringing through private arrangements with my parents. "Look at this," Hannah said, pulling out a more recent document. It was an email printout from Richard to Dad from just 2 years ago. "As always, I appreciate the annual update on Natalie. Her accomplishments in architecture are impressive. The attached funds should cover this year's agreement." My biological father had been following my life from a distance all along, receiving reports from my parents like I was some investment property they managed for him. Using the information we'd gathered, Hannah helped me locate Richard online. He was now a retired professor living in Palo Alto, just an hour from my home in San Francisco. His university profile showed a distinguished career in genetic research, and social media revealed 3 children approximately my age. I had half-siblings I'd never known about. A biological father who had been keeping tabs on me without ever meeting me. A lifetime of feeling less than that suddenly made perfect, horrible sense. "What are you going to do?" Hannah asked as we carefully replaced the documents, leaving no trace of our investigation. "Confront them," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "All of them. I've lived with lies long enough." Hannah nodded, then surprised me by taking my hand. "I'm so sorry, Natalie. I benefited from their deception my entire life, without knowing it. That house should have been half yours all along." "It's not your fault," I said, realizing I meant it. Hannah had been a pawn in our parents' elaborate deception too, albeit one who received the material benefits. "Let me help make this right," she insisted. Whatever you need for the confrontation, I'm there. As we locked up the house, I felt a shift in our relationship, a tentative alliance forming from the ashes of our manipulated childhood. We weren't just half-siblings by blood. We were now partners in uncovering the truth that had shaped both our lives in profoundly different ways. The next morning, we called our parents and asked them to meet us at the house that afternoon. "We need to talk about Dad's health plan," Hannah explained smoothly. "Both of us will be there." The stage was set for a confrontation that would finally bring the secrets of the Thompson family into the light. Eleanor and James Thompson arrived home to find both their daughters sitting at the dining room table, the damning documents spread between them. Mom entered first, her smile faltering as she took in the scene. Dad followed, his face draining of color as he recognized the folders. "What is this?" Mom asked, though her trembling voice suggested she already knew. I met her gaze steadily. "This is the truth you've hidden from me my entire life." Dad sank heavily into a chair, not bothering with denials. "You went through our private papers." "Private papers about my life," I countered. "About my biological father, Richard Clark. About the arrangement you made to raise me while ensuring I never received the same benefits as Hannah." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "Natalie, you have to understand." "Understand what, Mom?" "That you had an affair, got pregnant, and then spent the next 32 years punishing me for existing? That you and Dad accepted payment from Richard to keep me, like some business transaction, with the explicit condition that I would always be treated as less than Hannah?" The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Dad looked down at his hands, while Mom's eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "Then tell me what it was like," I demanded. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you both agreed to raise your affair child on the condition that she would never truly be treated as family." Hannah, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "How could you do this to her? To both of us? Do you have any idea what it did to our relationship, the way you pitted us against each other?" Dad finally looked up, his expression a complex mixture of guilt and relief. "I think it's time for the whole truth." He explained that Mom had been his research assistant at Michigan before they married. During a conference at Stanford, she had met Richard Clark, a rising star in genetics. Their brief affair ended when she discovered she was pregnant. She returned to Michigan and confessed to Dad, then her fiancé. "I loved your mother," Dad said, looking at me with tired eyes. "I agreed to marry her anyway to give the child you my name. But Richard insisted on certain provisions." "The lake house," I said flatly. Dad nodded. "He bought it as part of our arrangement. He didn't want public acknowledgement. He was married with young children of his own, but he wanted to provide financially. The trust was his idea. Property for Hannah, regular payments for your upbringing that went into our general household." "And what about the emotional neglect? Was that part of the arrangement too?" My voice cracked despite my efforts to remain composed. Mom shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "That was our failure. James tried, Natalie, but it was difficult for him. And I was so afraid of you discovering the truth. I overcompensated with Hannah to create balance, but it only made things worse." "Difficult for him?" I repeated incredulously. I was a child. I spent my entire childhood believing there was something fundamentally wrong with me that made me unlovable. "I know," Dad said quietly. "I told myself I was protecting you from rejection, that knowing your biological father wanted nothing to do with you would hurt more than my distance. I was wrong." Hannah had been going through more documents as we talked. "There's more," she said, holding up a recent letter. "Richard has been asking for direct contact for years. You've been refusing on Natalie's behalf." Mom's face crumpled. "We thought it was best." "Best for whom?" I demanded. "You had no right to make that decision for me." "He followed your life," Dad admitted. "Asked for updates, photos of your graduations, news about your career. He's seen everything from a distance." The revelation that my biological father had been a shadow presence all along was another shock. "So the "you'll understand someday" comment, that was about inheritance?" Dad nodded miserably. The trust specifies biological Thompson descendants. We try to make up for it in other ways, with practical sweaters and SAT books. The bitterness in my laugh surprised even me. While Hannah got the lake house and college paid for and a $50,000 wedding, Hannah stood abruptly. This ends now. I'm transferring half the lake house to Natalie. It should have been hers all along. Mom gasped. You can't. The trust specifies. I don't care what the trust specifies, Hannah snapped. This isn't about legal documents anymore. This is about doing what's right after a lifetime of wrong. The argument escalated, years of suppressed emotions erupting. Mom tearfully explained how she'd tried to protect me from feeling unwanted by my biological father, how guilt had corrupted her ability to parent me properly. Dad admitted that despite his best intentions, he had never fully bonded with me, his resentment of the affair subtly influencing our relationship. Richard has asked about you regularly, Mom revealed. He regrets the arrangement. Says it was the biggest mistake of his life. And you kept this from me, why? To protect him? To protect yourselves? Both, Dad admitted. And selfishly, we didn't want to lose you to him. Despite everything, Natalie, you are our daughter. I laughed bitterly. You can't lose what you never valued. The confrontation lasted hours, painful truths laid bare after decades of silence. Mom begged for forgiveness, insisting that her actions came from misguided protection rather than malice. Dad, quieter but seemingly relieved by the unburdening, accepted responsibility for his emotional distance. I failed you, he said simply. There's no excuse that justifies that. As night fell, Hannah and I gathered the documents we needed and prepared to leave. The Thompson house, once the site of so much hidden pain, now felt like a museum of deception I never wanted to visit again. Mom grabbed my arm as I headed for the door. Please, Natalie, can we try to rebuild? Now that everything is in the open. I gently removed her hand. I don't know. 32 years of lies don't disappear with one conversation. What will you do now? Dad asked, looking suddenly old and diminished. Meet my biological father, I replied. Learn the other half of the story. And then? The fear in Mom's voice was palpable. Then I'll decide what family means to me going forward. Hannah and I walked out together, leaving our parents standing in the doorway of a house filled with memories neither of us would ever see the same way again. In the car, Hannah turned to me with determination. I meant what I said about the lake house. Half of it is yours, legally and morally. I'm calling my lawyer tomorrow. For the first time in our adult lives, I felt a genuine connection with my half-sister. Thank you, I said simply. We drove to Hannah's hotel in silence, both processing the seismic shift in our understanding of our family. As we parted, she hugged me awkwardly. I'd like us to try again, she said. As sisters, without their manipulation between us. I nodded, surprised by my willingness to consider it. I'd like that too. That night, I called Marcus and told him everything. I'm coming home tomorrow, I said. And then I'm going to meet Richard Clark. Whatever happens, Marcus promised, we'll face it together. As I hung up, I realized that despite the devastation of discovering my life had been built on lies, there was something unexpectedly liberating about finally understanding the truth. The cryptic someday had arrived, and while the understanding brought pain, it also brought possibility, the chance to rebuild my identity and my relationships on a foundation of truth rather than secrets. 1 week later, I sat at a corner table in a quiet Palo Alto restaurant, watching the door. Marcus had offered to come, but this was something I needed to do alone. At precisely noon, a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair entered, scanning the room with an intensity that seemed familiar. Our eyes met, and recognition was immediate and mutual. I had his eyes, his jawline. Richard Clark approached slowly, as if afraid I might bolt. Natalie, he said, his voice catching. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. He settled across from me, hands clasped tightly on the table. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable, the same high forehead, the same way of tilting the head slightly when thinking. DNA made visible. I have questions, I began, dispensing with pleasantries. A lifetime of them. Richard nodded solemnly. You deserve answers. All of them. Over the next 3 hours, he told a side of the story. He had been a young professor with a wife and 2 young children when he met Eleanor at the conference. Their brief affair had been a mistake he regretted immediately, but when she called months later to tell him she was pregnant, he had panicked. I made the worst decision of my life, he admitted. I was terrified of losing my family, my career. I thought I could solve it with money, provide financially, without disrupting lives. I didn't consider what it would mean for you to grow up without knowing who you really were. Did you ever want to meet me? I asked, the question that had haunted me since discovering his existence. Every single day, he replied without hesitation. I have a file this thick. He held his hands apart to indicate substantial width. Your school photos, newspaper clippings about your swimming medals, your college graduation announcement, articles about your architectural projects. James sent updates yearly, and I researched everything else I could find. I told myself I was protecting you by staying away, but the truth is, I was protecting myself from facing my cowardice. His regret seemed genuine, his pain real. Yet it didn't erase 32 years of absence. I have half-siblings? I asked. He nodded, producing his phone with photos of 2 men and a woman around my age. Michael, David, and Sarah.
They don't know about you yet.
That's your decision. And your wife passed away 3 years ago. Breast cancer.
He paused.
She knew about you. After the children were grown, I told her everything. She encouraged me to contact you directly, but James and Eleanor always refused. We talked until the restaurant began setting up for dinner service. Richard explained that he had established a trust fund for me years ago that James and Eleanor had refused to tell me about. He offered it to me now, a substantial sum that had grown over decades. I don't want your money, I told him flatly. I want the time back, the knowing who I was. His eyes, so like mine, filled with tears. I can't give you that. I can only offer what I have now, the truth, my remorse, and a chance to know each other going forward, if you want that. I left without making promises, but with contact information for my half-siblings and an agreement to meet again after I'd had time to process everything. Back in San Francisco, Marcus held me as I worked through the complex emotions of finding my biological father. He seems genuinely remorseful, I told him, but I don't know if that's enough. You don't have to decide everything now, Marcus reminded me. Healing takes time. 2 months later, Hannah called with news. The lake house transfer is complete. You officially own half now. And I've scheduled contractors to build a wall dividing the property into 2 separate homes, if that's what you want. I don't want to divide it, I said after a moment's reflection. I want to reclaim it together. We made plans to meet at the lake house the following month. When I arrived, I was struck by how beautiful it still was despite the modern renovations. The lake stretched blue and inviting beyond the windows, just as it had in my childhood memories. Hannah greeted me with her children, who seemed curious about this and they barely knew. I've told them the truth, she said quietly. An age-appropriate version, anyway. That we're half-sisters, but fully family. Over the next week, Hannah and I began the painful but necessary process of rebuilding our relationship. We shared memories from different perspectives, recognized how we'd both been manipulated, and found surprising common ground as adults. I always envied how smart you were, Hannah admitted one evening as we sat on the dock. How easily everything academic came to you. Mom and Dad made me feel like I had to be perfect in other ways to compete. And I envied how they loved you without condition, I replied. How you never had to earn your place. We decided to renovate the lake house together, creating a space that honored its history while accommodating both our families. I would use my architectural expertise to design a home that could be shared or used independently, a physical manifestation of our new relationship. My relationship with my parents evolved more slowly. Mom called weekly, her desperate attempts to make amends gradually giving way to more honest conversations. Dad, still recovering from his heart attack, wrote me a long letter acknowledging how his inability to separate me from the circumstances of my conception had caused lasting damage. "I deprived myself of fully knowing an extraordinary daughter," he wrote. "That is my loss and my deepest regret." 3 months after our initial meeting, I agreed to introduce Richard to Marcus. They connected over shared interests in science and technology, Richard clearly approving of the man I'd chosen. After dinner, Richard hesitantly asked if I would consider meeting my half-siblings. "They know about you now," he said. "They want to meet their sister." The meeting with Michael, David, and Sarah was awkward but heartfelt. They had been shocked by the revelation but were universally welcoming, curious about the sister they'd never known. Sarah, especially, seemed eager to build a relationship, noting our similar mannerisms and interests. "It's like finding a missing puzzle piece," she said, studying my face. "I always wanted a sister close to my age." That Christmas, 15 years after the fateful holiday when Hannah had received the lake house key, we gathered at the newly renovated property. Hannah and I had decided to create new traditions, inviting both sets of parents, Marcus, Tyler, the children, and my newly discovered half-siblings. Eleanor and James arrived first, visibly nervous about the expanded family gathering. Richard came later with Michael, David, and Sarah. The initial tension gradually eased as the day progressed, the next generation of children oblivious to the complex adult dynamics as they played in the snow outside. After dinner, Hannah and I exchanged a look and stood together. "We have something to show you," Hannah announced, leading everyone to the front of the house. There, newly installed on the restored original post, was a sign reading Thompson Clark Lake House, with both our names underneath. "This place holds difficult memories," I explained, "but also good ones. We're choosing to build new memories here, based on truth and inclusion rather than secrets and exclusion." Mom wiped tears from her eyes. Dad nodded solemnly, understanding the significance. Richard stood slightly apart, respectful of the complex dynamics, but visibly moved to be included. Later that evening, as Marcus and I walked along the frozen shoreline, I reflected on the journey from that devastating Christmas morning to this moment of fragile new beginnings. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, squeezing my mittened hand. "Not entirely," I admitted. "I don't think complete healing is possible after that kind of deception. But I'm at peace with the truth now. I know who I am, all of who I am." The understanding my father had cryptically promised had finally come, though not in the way any of them had likely imagined. I had understood that family isn't determined by biology or legal documents, but by truth, respect, and the courage to rebuild after devastation. That night, I added a small, private nameplate to the bedroom Marcus and I were using: Natalie Thompson Clark. Not denying either part of my heritage, but claiming both on my own terms. Family secrets may shape us, but they don't have to define us. Sometimes understanding comes not from accepting what was done to you, but from choosing what you will do with the truth once it's finally in your hands. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed your understanding of your place in the world? The journey through family betrayal to truth is rarely easy, but it often leads to unexpected healing. If my story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences might help others feeling lost in similar family dramas. Don't forget to subscribe for more real family stories that remind us we're not alone in these complicated human experiences. And if you found value in my journey from secrets to truth, hitting that like button helps others find this story too. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most powerful act of self-love is choosing truth over comfortable illusions. Family karma eventually comes full circle, and creating a new legacy is the ultimate revenge against those who tried to diminish your worth.